recording.
Professor, these recordings are in your
No, they are on, I put them on Canvas. So let me go back to that page. Let me out of these, let me get out of there for that presentation. Yeah, so if you go to Canvas, I'll show you what they are. So let me go back to the modules. Like I said, I've forgotten to do, when we had all the problem with the passport, I totally forgot to record it, but let's see. I'll show you what they look like. Yeah, so see this one right here? 104 Thursday, 3/24/2020. I think that's one of the first things we did. So you can actually click on that and it will actually take you to the recording that we did. So you see that, and then like I said, I forgot to do a few of them because some of the issues I just forgot, and so I remember today. So so that's what you'll see. So the one for this week, you should be able to see them. We'll say something like recording for the date of the class. That makes sense? Okay. All right. So let me get back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So anyway, so we left off somewhere around here where we were looking at the physiography, again being the physical geography. You see the PowerPoint now, right? But see that? Yes? You can tell me your.
Yes, we can see it.
You are seeing the screen. Okay. Good. So yeah, so this is a brief review from what we did on last Thursday. So these are some of the main physical parts of Africa. Congo Basin in the middle there. Basin again means a hole. It's like basically that's some of the lowest portions. It's right on the by the equator. So it's just, tropical forests are usually in there. Rains a lot. Most of the rivers come out from there or go in there. Actually, basin means that they actually go in there, and some of the rivers. And like I said, the area is pretty flat, so it's the rivers run pretty freely. There's no mountains that stop them. I'm gonna talk a little more about the East African Rift Valley. This is basically two plate tectonics that are moving away from each other. So in a few million years, there's going to be like a big sea in the middle. And basically East Africa will be, the Horn of Africa will be separated from the rest of Africa. I'll talk a little more about that. Relatively flat again, but in this area around the East Africa Rift Valley, that's where most of the highest elevations are found. And mainly because, again, a lot of these elevations, a lot of these mountains are created by the interaction of these plates that are basically going away from each other. But that's where you're going to find Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the tallest one in Africa. But for the most part, most of Africa is relatively flat. You see the deserts, the Namibia Desert and the Kalahari Desert on the southwestern part of Africa towards the tip of Africa. We're talking about the Ethiopian highlands. Again, this is an area that is relatively high in elevation. These are really well-reached areas. In fact, this whole area around the East African, the Rift Valley are some of the most fertile. Africa, the northern part is very desertic, so it's not very fertile. And then we get to the 47 degrees between the tropics. They tend to be, tropical soils are not the most fertile in the world either. There's a lot of drainage, a lot of the water drains very quickly. And so most of Africa is not very fertile in terms of agriculture. But this area right here, because of the volcanic soils, high, very rich type of soil, they tend to be very fertile. So a lot of this is a very rich area in terms of agriculture. And you can see large centers of population there because they sustain a lot of people living in those areas. Right, so I think that we left off here when I was showing you some of the landscapes. This is the Namib Desert. These are some of Lake Victoria and some of the lakes that are created by the rifts. Lots of Africa looks like this, in African savannas, where you have sort of a night, they're relatively within the tropical region, so, but they are known because they have a wet period and a dry period. So in the times that there's torrential rains happening, kind of monsoonal type of, it's not quite a monsoon, it's going to be a lot of water. Animals tend to, especially the big fauna that are very unique to this region of the world, they tend to roam, literally following where the water is. So in the dry season, they're going to be moving away, migrating to find areas that where some of the water is still left. And then when the rains come back, they sort of come back to the coastal areas where they usually roam freely. Again, some of the scarps that we have, the falls that are created by some of these formations. Again, in some of these high plateaus, you see scarps like this that are usually like created by tectonic activity. This is the Rift Valley, and when plate tectonics interact with each other, when they're separating away from each other, you're creating valleys and rifts. So you kind of create hills as well as valleys. And because this is one of the few places in the world, besides Iceland, that you can actually see this type of, plates that are separating away from each other. Most of them happen in the ocean. You can actually see what happens on land, which is very unusual. Most of them are usually underwater. And there's Mount Kilimanjaro. Again, this actually might be Mount Kenya. I don't remember. Yeah, I think that might be Mount Kenya. The other one that I showed you before was Mount Kilimanjaro, but it still is within that area where the higher mountains are going to be in that area of the Rift Valley. So here's what happens with the Rift Valley. You can see it from the ocean, literally from the ocean, from space. You can actually see these two places sort of separating away from each other. So it is this geologic uplift that happens as they move away from each other. Lava comes up, or magma comes up, and eventually becomes lava. And so again, it creates rifts and valleys. Again, it's very, because of that situation, because of the rich mineral soils, it's also really big on biodiversity, water resources, and lots of mineral wealth as well. We'll talk a lot about that later on. But overall, in Africa, again, generally poor soils because of the tropical, particularly the Sub Sahara part, and lots of disease. And so there's alternating periods of disease, in some cases in tropical regions by too much water, and then drought, like in the Sahara region, there's not enough water. And again, with climate change, we've seen a lot of those fluctuations. But here's what is happening basically. Like, say, this is how you see it from plate. You can actually see the plate moving away from each other. But on this picture on the left over here, there are two plates. There's one, the African plate, they call it the Nubian plate as well, that is moving away westward, whereas the Indian plate is moving away eastward. And so literally you see that friction, you see two plates separating. And so it's creating this area right here, it's creating, that's why they call it the Rift Valley, because you create, as it separates, magma pops up. Again, this has happened over geologic time, over millions of years. Periodically, you have eruptions in some of these volcanoes that are created over here. But a lot of these eruptions that have created these valleys and these rifts is due to this movement of the plates moving away from each other. And so again, this is one of the types of plates that where they move away. Some of them collide with each other. In this case, they're separating away from each other. And so I expect somewhere in a few million years that this whole area right here will be a big old sea right in the middle here. And the Horn of Africa will actually, this whole part could be a major island as well. So we'll be a sea in between, some big island like the whole where Ethiopia is at and all that, the whole Horn of Africa could be a big island, probably bigger than Mozambique. So again, this is all going to be happening in geologic time. So it's active, very active, lots of earthquakes, lots of volcanic activity, and so on. It's called the Great Rift Valley. So again, plateaus and basins is pretty common what you see in Africa. In some areas you're going to see the great escarpment. What What that means is basically you have a plateau where you have some blocks of land, and these are massive blocks of land that sort of subsided. They can either collapse, and when they do collapse, when they sort of sink, so to speak, you create these escarpments right here, and there's some massive ones around Africa. But again, very few mountain ranges. Victoria Falls are very famous. That's where the Nile River starts. Nile River runs to the north, and so it starts out down around Victoria Falls and goes all the way out to the Mediterranean. Right? So here are some of the watershed. Now, watershed, the definition of watershed is so water follows gravity, right? Water is going to go to the deepest part anywhere in the world. So in the Congo basin, it's whole. It's the deepest part of the whole area. So a lot of rivers are going to converge there. But rivers also have branches, so to speak, and they call those watersheds. And some of these are pretty massive. These are the biggest rivers. Congo, Niger, Nile, and Zambezi, and they sort of expand sort of the web all over. But again, the soils are relatively unfertile. The rivers, for the most part, are not navigable. It's very difficult to navigate through them. There are some of these plateaus, there's some of these escarpments that create falls. They might be good for creating perhaps hydroelectric power, but they're not very good for navigating. And so I suppose we'll talk about in Europe that we have rivers that you can come from a port in the ocean and literally move deeper into inland. Not so in Africa. It's a big issue that Africa have. You can have little ships going around, but you can't bring massive cargo to some of these rivers, which is not very navigable. Right? And in terms of climates, tropical climates are going to be dominant. Of course, we're not talking too much about North Africa. Remember that North Africa, we usually talk about it in the Middle East, in the context of the Middle East. So the further north you go up in Sub Sahara-Africa, the drier they're going to be. So these heat climates, PWH, or those you have to remember the specific, but those are dry climates. Usually have what is called as a tropical high pressure system sitting on the west side, West Africa part over here. And as a result of that, high pressure always creates desertic conditions. Most of the deserts around the world tend to be on high pressure areas. And so we got one sitting right over here that creates some of these dry areas. So now here's the equator, right around here. So there's the equator. So this is the northern hemisphere. So you're going to have all these soils north of, it goes subtropical, north of the tropics. But then in the southern hemisphere, in Africa is so big that it encompasses two different hemispheres. And so the southern part, you're going to have the same. So in the western side of continents, you're going to have a high pressure system here. And these areas are going to be very, very dry. So the big deserts that I mentioned earlier, Kalahari and Namibia deserts are right in this area. So these areas are very, very, very dry. On the other hand, like within the 47 degrees between the tropics, you're going to have lots of tropical climates, usually the tropical climates. And we have them all basically from right in the middle where we have the tropical forest regions. Those are the tropical, very rainy areas. Again, lots of tropical forests in there. The tropical monsoon that usually you have those right around this area where we say the AM part. So this area that was part of West Africa is impacted by the monsoon. It's kind of like India, and we'll talk about that later, that the ITCZ switches, in this case, it switches south, and it tends to impact, it switches north, I'm sorry, because we're talking about the hemisphere. And this area is very prone for flooding. Again, as sea level rises, we'll talk about some of those dangers. These areas are very prone for flooding. The sea level rises, it's going to have even more problems in the future. And then we have the savanna that I was telling you about. You can see that it dominates at least half, or at least more than a third of the entire African landscape. It's sort of again where you associate with lions and elephants running around. That's savanna, where you're going to see in large parts of Africa. Now we get down to the southern tip. In Cape Town, for instance, CSB is actually Mediterranean type of climate. Sea climates are called mid-latitude climates. The ones on the East Coast are going to be wet, are going to be sort of rainy in their summers, because the summers is opposite than ours. Right now, it's starting to get in the fall, and eventually they're going to go into their winter. They're just kind of getting out of their summers. And so now the CSV climate right here is Mediterranean, is like San Diego. I'll show you some pictures later on. And they're very, very common to what happens, very similar to what we have here in San Diego or Southern California, the Mediterranean type of climate. And a few areas around the Rift Valley, again, because they're mountainous areas, particularly in Ethiopia, the highland areas there, you're going to have H climate, which are associated with mountain areas. Right? The H climates is their own classification for basically highlands. And you can see the sort of the climographs. You can see in some areas in the tropical areas, so the rainforest area. You can see the temperatures don't change that much. They're going to be relatively warm year round, very wet. You can see at the bottom, you see the patterns of how wet they are. And of course, in the Sahel region, the opposite. Very little rain. In fact, it's becoming even worse in the world. So tropical climates are dominant, but again, in the edges, you're gonna have some dry climates. Now, dry climates are the most widespread around the world. So not usually gonna have a large portion of dry climates as well. All right. Yeah, so I was talking, Cassidy, you were asking about the escarpments. Like I say, so picture a block of land. You know, I speak with my hands, I can't see it. You have a block of land, and one block can collapse and basically sink. And so and again, these blocks are massive. So you have a whole area, let's say as big as San Diego, and we call this tectonic movement. There's not necessarily plate activity, but you have faults in different parts, just like we do in San Diego. And some of these faults, when they rupture, when the pressure builds in, they can sometimes collapse, basically sink, or sometimes they can go on top of each other. They can, compress with each other. Again, in geologic time, but when that happens, they can create these escarpments. Our escarpment is, so imagine you have a block of land together, and one of them collapses. So the part that you see where the land was before is now a hole. Imagine if you dig in a hole, and where you see the wall that you see there from which you just dig the hole, that whole area is like escarpment. And that's what it looks like. That's why they look like this. I don't know, the picture that you were talking to earlier. You can see sort of like a top of the hill, and you can see sort of like a flat surface where the land just sank. I'm going forward. Sorry. Yeah, because I know what this one right here. So this picture that you see, so here's the escarpment is basically this area that I'm pointing with the arrow right now. This area down here sank, right? So at some point, millions of years ago, they were actually flat with each other. So when this area right here collapsed, when sank in, these became exposed. That's what is called escarpment. So at some point, they were all flat with each other. But this exposed area right here. And so what happened in Africa is some of these things are massive. I mean, it's almost hard to imagine because we've probably never seen it, because I don't think we would survive that. So imagine like, a third of Africa collapsing and leaving all this basically exposed land all over. And of course now, this has been millions of years. It looks like it might have always been like that. When it happened, it wasn't like that. Does that make sense, Cassidy? Okay. Anyway, so let's talk about some of the environmental issues. Oh, yeah, by the way, before we get into, in terms of, because of the climate, remember that usually biomes are basically regions, are biological regions, different type, the climates are usually going to determine the type of vegetation that you have. And so tropical forests are they're going to be in the tropical regions. Savannas are dominant, and of course deserts. Those are the three types of biome, the type of environmental regions that you're going to see in Africa. And of course, we talk about the Horn of Africa, that is basically being created by these. Well, the Horn of Africa is geography, right? But you see that it's right at the edge of where the where these plates are acting with each other. They become active with each other, right? So now here are some of the environmental issues that are impacting Africa. I think you can, in the text, you can read them very carefully. I think if you, I mean, I'm looking at it, you can blow it up, and you can actually read each one of these. But many issues, of course, are related to climate change. Some of because of man things that we are doing as people. We see this whole area right here. It's called the Sahel. It's H-A-E-L, like you see right over here. This is an area that there's a lot of people living in here. There are very few lakes. In fact, Lake Chad, for instance, that is one of the main sources of water, this lake right here, is drying out. And so there's millions of people that live in this area. And this area is desertifying. It's also a lot of nomadic, a lot of sort of transhumans, they call them, um, um, people that are moving, looking for places to farm or to move, to feed their cattle. And as these places become drier, you begin to have a lot of problems. Later on, I'm going to talk to you about issues with religion and ethnic rivalries that make this area also very conflicted. So in addition to the desperation we have with people starving because they can't have enough food because it's getting so dry, you also have a lot of religious political conflict in this area that makes it very troublesome. Some of the major famines that continue to happen around the world are increasingly happening in this area. And many of you probably, perhaps you're too young, but in the 80s, early 90s, there was always famines here in Ethiopia. This issue is also impacted by lots of dry desertification areas. These are some areas, climate change in some areas, they actually become wetter in some parts of it, but there's still a lot of drought in there and large populations that live in there that are hard to keep up with it. It gets better as you go south because, you got more better soils because of the volcanic region. But a lot of what was happening in that area as well, particularly around Uganda and Kenya, there has been a lot of deforestation. Later on, I'm going to talk about Wangari Maathai, which is created this green belt movement that they basically were planting millions of trees to reforest a lot of these areas around Uganda and Kenya. Many places are using dams to maintain, to keep some of their water. Again, remember that the Nile River starts right around here and it goes all the way up to right all the way to Egypt. And so often, particularly in areas that are like in the highlands of Ethiopia, they can actually dam some of that water to keep it as some of the branches of the Nile River go through. And so that can also create conflict with neighbors. Eritrea and Ethiopia have been at war for years. In fact, just very recently, they sort of signed some peace agreements, but they've been fighting for decades, and civil wars have been going on for forever. In many cases, it's over water, over resources, and so on. Here we have some rainforests right in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are some really interesting forests in that they have some but they remain very much untouched because they're very difficult to access. There's no navigation, the rivers are not navigable. So you have to usually fly or find some other ways to get there. But what they have been finding is that when those people who get there, they find this very exotic type of what they call tropical hardwoods. They kind of black, and so they're sought after by the entire world. They're very expensive, but they're very difficult to get to. And so, what many some of these trees take thousands, a couple thousand years to, come back. And so it's causing a lot of problems in those areas because people want to get access to those trees. They cut them down, they don't replenish them. And again, even then, they're going to take a long time to replenish. Um, um, so again, we have issues with wildlife as well. Wildlife that becomes vulnerable because of poaching. The stories of elephants. I'll talk a little more about that. But what they've been doing, they've been particularly in the savannah region where some of these wildlife is found. They've been creating some of these national parks that were national reserves where some of these animals are maintained and they're protected from poaching. Particularly like rhinos, elephants, that the numbers have been going down drastically because of people getting either the tusks of the elephants or the ivory that they have, or the horns or the rhinos tend to be really sought after. But anyway, so there's all kinds of protocols that have been established to try to prevent that. But these are some of the issues. I mentioned before also that this area of West Africa, particularly this area right here, because of flooding, it tends to be very prone to sea level rising. As the sea level rises, these become even more prone to flooding. And every time you get the monsoon, those areas get flooded. With flooding, with too much water, particularly in the areas in the tropical regions, you're also going to have diseases, you have malaria. We'll talk about those later on as well. Those are issues that continue to prevail in Africa. So I talk about the Sahel region, again, very dry area of the world, and getting drier, it's certifying. So here's what happens. So because a lot of people are they call it transhumans, they're people that are moving away. They're kind of nomads, but a little less nomadic. I don't know if that makes sense. In that they are searching for greener pastures every time, and they follow season. But in many cases, what they do, they'll have agriculture, and the resources are very limited. They don't have a lot of money. Every time you grow something, you take minerals and resources from the soil, and the soil becomes less fertile, right? So if you don't have money to pay to buy fertilizer, well, that soil is going to continue to lose its productivity, its fertility. And so what happens in some of these areas, once the soil loses its fertility, or people move to another area, and then those areas become desertified, and you can no longer do agriculture in there. So people go find another area where they start all over again. They do the same thing with animals. They take them to a greener area. Once these animals basically overgraze the region, the area, they move on and they go to another area. And so that's the whole concept of transhumans is people are moving along with the animals, looking for literally greener pasture. And so again, these are some of the reasons that are causing. Now, these are not new things. They have happened in the past. Uh, some people say, well, why is it that is so much desertification in that? So it goes to, like I say, we're going to talk about all the colonization processes. That sort of places were left very fragmented. There was no interest on building any infrastructure in Africa by the colonizers. They simply just wanted to get stuff out of there. And so again, it's over a period of time. And again, simply the places is getting warmer, getting overused, and that many places are not being replaced to make them more productive. So a lot of issues going on in the Sahel with desertification, and again, people don't have anything to eat. They're going to move. There's a lot of refugee camps in the area, IDPs, that are called internal displaced people within their countries, and others that are moving either prosecuted or simply moving away because of they're hungry. there's a lot of stuff going on in there. So again, the savanna, the deforestation of savanna is also a big issue. And here's the reason why. Um, uh, in Africa, it's still one of the regions where one of the main sources of energy is literally burning wood. And they call those biofuels. It's almost like what is that word? You just sort of veil it. Um, so anyway, people are burning a lot of wood to to cook their food and so on, right? And so they're deforesting areas, and then you see other areas in the past. When we're talking about the Caribbean, for instance, that happened a lot in Haiti, where they were basically taking down forests because they wanted to use the wood, not to build homes and all that, but also in places like Africa is largely their main source of energy. That's how they cook food and stuff, and of course, there's also for commercial logging. And I mentioned in the tropical rainforest that they have that really exotic, really expensive type of wood that you know people are not very careful because they need money. They're not very careful to preserve or to reforest a lot of these tropical rainforests. So I was talking about this woman right here, Wangari Maathai. She won the Nobel Prize. She passed away very recently, but she won the Nobel Prize for basically creating what they call a green belt movement. So she organized largely women, huge numbers of women, girls, to reforest places. So a lot of these areas that were losing their forest areas, they would she will organize these foresting events where millions of trees were being planted. And of course, in some of these areas, they're benefiting from the growth of a lot of trees as a result of her efforts. Again, she was recognized. Again, she was given. She was also really involved with the climate change movement, understanding the impact that this deforestation and coupled with the climate issues that we're having in Africa. Now, so as a result of some of these, so they need wood to cook their food and everything. I'm going to show you a little video, one of these Google Maps video that Google Earth video that are going to show some innovative efforts that they're trying to develop in Africa and involve bamboo that they use it for wood to build huts and everything like that, as well as in buildings, to build buildings, but also to use it for to cook food, to cook. So here we go. You see the video now, right?
Yes.
In Sub-Saharan Africa is occurring at twice the world rate. Some parts of the region have lost as much as 90% of their original forests, which have been cut to clear land for agriculture, as well as be converted to charcoal, which is the primary fuel for 90% of the population in the region. In countries like Ethiopia and Ghana, growing bamboo is emerging as a sustainable way to help alleviate poverty, encourage development, reduce land degradation, and meet the demand for fuel. Let's head to Ethiopia, which has been developing sustainable bamboo management practices with the aid of substantial foreign investment. In the highland areas like we see here, bamboo grows rapidly and can grow on degraded and marginal land. It also is effective at preventing erosion in areas with steep slopes. Bamboo, a fast-growing grass, can be harvested after a few years of growth, compared to 25 to 30 years for most trees. Bamboo also burns more cleanly than wood, making it an attractive alternative to charcoal. In Ghana, bamboo is being introduced as a renewable alternative to firewood and charcoal. Here we see the Ashanti region, home to the first bamboo plantation in the country. While bamboo grows naturally in the wild in Ghana, the Ashanti region underwent severe deforestation in the 1970s. Bamboo is being introduced into these deforested areas. Ghana is promoting the development of bamboo plantations, and Ghanaians are finding creative uses for bamboo beyond its use as a biofuel. The United Nations currently is funding an initiative in Ghana to produce bicycles made from locally grown bamboo.
Again, a lot of people are finding creative ways to, a lot of times they say that what is a necessity is the mother of creation or something like that. Just like we saw, like in India, some of the pictures I showed at the beginning, where women are using those wula, what do you call them, wula wheels that you can, instead of carrying the water in your shoulders, you can just roll it. And so they're always finding ways to deal with some of the scarcity of resources that they have. And I think this bamboo is one of those. So of course, energy is a big issue. And now, like I was mentioning before, if you look at, we talk about how in most of Africa, I think I will show you some other pictures where you see that, but you'll see where you see that that wood is still the number one source for cooking and stuff like that. But you also see that are countries in Africa that are high producers of oil as well, right? So you can see countries that are in the orange color, I guess, whatever the color that is, that are actually producing oil. And when you can see, of course, if you produce oil, you're going to use it, and you're going to use it for energy. So you can see that some of the levels are actually increasing in terms of people actually using oil to deal with the issues. One of the largest the energy needs. One of the largest producers of oil is Nigeria. In fact, one of the top producers of oil in the world. Is a member of OPEC, and now they also produce natural gas. So we can see areas that they have those the blue dash lines in there. That means that they're also producing natural gas. And so the percentages are going up of people using oil as they modernize, which tends to happen. They tend to modernize. They tend to increase the uses of oil. Again, as we find out in the developed world, as you use more oil, there's also a lot of issues with pollution. Again, Africa is one of the least, have some of the lowest carbon prints in the world because they produce very little pollution. But that is changing as they urbanize, as more investment is coming in the production of oil. That is changing. So again, and I don't know the number. I know, for instance, Nigeria is part of OPEC. It may be that there might be a couple of others that I can't remember all the African OPEC countries. But especially in Nigeria, we're having a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues with pollution, oil that is not well, how would I put it this way? They're not, the infrastructure is not set up to keep it clean. And so you see lakes, you see areas that are heavily polluted by some of the off products from refining of oil and all that stuff. And so it creates a lot of problems. There's a lot of people that live right next to it. And I don't know if I talk too much about it in the context of Latin America, but in Mexico, they had a big issue, particularly with the cartels being involved, the drug cartel, that are actually siphoning oil from the oil pipes. And so, what do they call it? Huachicoleo, I think they call it, huachicoleo in Mexico. That is basically taking oil from these, I think it's with an H, huachicoleo. So they take it from the pipes and they sort of grab it, they steal it, and then they sell it somewhere else, and what happens is when they're not going to be very nice about it. It's like they're not going to rob it and then kind of make sure that's a spill. But what happens, they take the oil that they want if they get caught, or at least they run away from being caught. Pollution happens, usually spills happen. And so in some of these areas where they're stealing oil, which happens a lot, it's a big business, illegal, of course, in Nigeria, where the people are ripping out these pipes and stealing the oil and then selling it somewhere else. But it's causing a lot of problems with pollution and dangers. You know, some of these things explode and you know, match because of an explosion, people die as a result of it. So in some of these oil producing countries, it's not unusual to have this type of problem. Anyway, the issue, another big issue again, we're talking about wild conservation. Africa is still one of those few areas where we have what they call these big fauna. These are some of these very exotic animals, very that tend to be endemic to Africa and not found in many other places in the world. So now, in one of the reasons, again, there's a lot of open land. The savannas tend to be very open for these type of animals to roam around. And of course, the relatively rural population that we have in Africa is, you know, it makes it very common for this part of the world. Some of these things are changing. That's why they're starting to create some of the national parks, and, because there's also these free roaming makes it really prone for poaching. People, you know, grabbing the ivories. And so now, so as the population has declined because of some of these issues, it's putting a lot of pressure on the politicians to sort of deal with this issue. It is one of the things that Africa has to offer. And again, even as population grows and there's more needs for people to, I mean, they can kill one of these rhinos just to take the horn and they can make a few $1,000s in the black market. And, you know, people will do it because they're desperate because of the poverty. So there has been international protocols to try and stop the growth of these poaching or these loss of wildlife. And so one you see here, CITES, it is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It's called CITES. I wish I could. There's a little thing that I can. Anyway, everybody got that? Is I think as I put it on the. So I should probably spell it out. But it's a Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It started out around 1989, and it basically banned the ivory trade. Basically, elephants were being killed simply to take their ivory, tusks, they take them out. And the same thing was happening with rhinos. So the CITES treaty, it was also applied to rhinos as well. And so, you know, there has been little progress as basically as the population numbers begin to increase. Of course, rhino population still hasn't quite increased yet. Particularly the white rhino. There's very few white rhinos left in the world. I think most of them are in captivity in zoos all over the world. And so it's slowly coming back, but there's still a lot of poaching, a lot of problems with people continue. But banning the ivory trade, it helped a lot, because if he can no longer sell those in open markets, then it's going to basically going to leave it to the black market to deal with. It's still pretty big, still happening. Elephants still being killed, but in some areas, in the savanna regions, different savanna regions of Africa, some of the numbers, particularly on those national parks, on the national reserves that they've been creating, the numbers of many of these big fauna are rising up, are going up. There's good old elephants. Anybody been to Africa, by the way? If you've been to Africa, I know it's so awful that people are still doing this, but unfortunately they are doing it. There are places, most of them again, it's for the ivory, for tusks and stuff like that. Many of these are like the horn of the rhino. I guess is sought after in China and I think a few other Asian countries, and they sort of grind it up. It's supposed to be an aphrodisiac, which anyway, but yeah, the people will kill these animals just to get particularly.
Did you hear like last year there was a big bust in La Jolla? Like there's this shop or whatever had like thousands or millions of dollars worth of illegal ivory.
No, I didn't hear that about that.
Yeah, it was right in La Jolla. It was like last year. It was
But,
crazy.
you know, sometimes I read the reports on the border. They have a thing on the. I don't think it's ICE, it's the border customs where they show you what they discover as people trying to get across the border.
Yeah.
Usually coming from Mexico to the U.S. And
Yeah.
they find a lot of these, where they find like species that are prohibited, like snakes and weird things like that the people are crossing over. But periodically they bust some people bring in like ivory or again, I don't know about that particular case you're talking about, but it's not unusual for you know, to bring them over and then to try to distribute them around and sell them to someone again
Yeah.
in the black market because it's all now prohibited until some of these international treaties. But yeah, and people are doing it. They're doing that with turtles. There's turtles in Mexico that are in the Mexican government has you know, they're banned. They can't. People cannot go grab them and because people eat them or whatever they do with them. And a lot of people bring them over to the States. They cross them over the border and they try to sell them over here. So anyway, I don't know who they sell it to, but there's always a market for it. Yeah. Anyway, so again, I'm just again when I talk about some of the issues with climate vulnerability, but since this is a very timely issue, here's the Sahel region that I was telling you about, areas that are very high in vulnerability. I mean, these are, and again, you hear this a lot on the news, people that are literally starving in some of these areas. And periodically, when things get really bad, it's just massive starvation. Thousands of people are dying or simply not having enough food. And it's getting worse because it's getting drier and drier. Again, a lot of it is due to climate change, the fact that some of these areas are becoming desertified. Of course, people are not helping by overgrazing or by simply just taking basically all the productivity of the fields and they become deserts eventually. But again, even though Africa has a very low per capita emission of greenhouse gases, the model is changing because of urbanization and more production uses of oil. They still have a lot of issues that are related to vulnerability to climate change. So a lot of it is arid. Again, these areas are prone to famine. When you look at this area right around this region, you can see when you look at the map that I just put out there, in terms of food insecurity, you can see some areas that are generally well secure. Now, these are some areas, again, this is changing as well, but you see some of these areas where there are lakes available and people can still sort of grow some of their products. But you can see, particularly, again, as you see in the Sahel region that I was telling you about, you start seeing a lot of areas of moderately insecurity in terms of food in areas that are highly insecure. Areas, this area right here, in southern border, here's Lake Chad. Lake Chad is drying out. And so these areas depend on Lake Chad to feed all the population, millions of people that live in this area. And as the lake dries out, areas around it tend to suffer famine. Now, again, I'll show you later on that these areas are also very conflicted in terms of religious, ethnic regions, and that makes it even worse. In addition to reasons of climate drying out, you also have conflict, people fighting each other, being prosecuted, being chased out of their country, sent into camps, refugee camps, and where people are barely just having enough to eat for the day. So lots of really heavy issues in the Sahel region. Right, so we move on now to a little bit about population. Again, we see some pyramids here when you compare Ethiopia with South Africa. Ethiopia has a very typical developing country type of population pattern, usually in what they call the demographic in the demographic model that they usually in the second stage. People are living a little longer because there's more medical conditions, but even though in general life expectations are a lot lower than other parts of the world. And so you can see a really wide base. Apparently means that the populations are relatively young. And you compare that with South Africa, for instance, where it's a lot more of a more like a developed country, even though they still have a lot of poverty and stuff like that. You can start seeing the base solidifying. Population is aging a little bit, heavy active working population, and slowly, little by little, the sort of the pyramid is sort of inverting. It'll be a while before it actually like European type, or the Japanese with the inverted pyramid, but you can still see that it's sort of moving away from that, from what you see in most developing countries, which is a really young population, really wide. Now, Africa is also growing very rapidly in terms of population. As it tends to happen in the demographic transition models, as sanitation becomes a little bit better, people have a little more access. I mean, I'm not saying that they have it, that it's great yet, but as it gets better, people live longer. There's not as much infant death as it had been in the past. It's still really horrible. And you know, as things get a little bit better for people, population continues to expand. And of course, there's a lot of sort of like cultural reasons, and I don't mean necessarily related to the culture, the ethnicity of the people, but and I'll talk about those later on. The traditional expectations of family sizes, the fact that Africa is still very rural, so families is still, you will still want large families, so they can help in a farm. You know, having a lot of kids is usually one way that ensures that you can sort of feed the entire family. It's sort of like a double-edged sword, but you know, the more people you have, the more you have to work to feed the people. But again, this is what I mean by cultural reasons, that this sort of rural culture that wants you to have large families, so you can still go take them to the farm and so on. So here's some of the demographic trends that we see in Africa. Again, there's a decrease in child mortality. It's a really positive thing, and that's why you've seen a big growth in population. I'll show you some numbers later on. Life expectancy is also rising, but look at the family size. The TFR basically it indicates the size of the typical average size of a family, 5.1. Again, that's a cultural preference, a rural lifestyle. It usually means, you know, you have a large family, it ensures security for the elders. And so large families is still a cultural preference in Africa. Now, here's what happens as the population become more urban, that those sizes begin to diminish. And as countries begin to experience more urban, they usually means that in some cases, the women may have to work. They have to go out, and so usually the sizes of the family begin to decline, begin to get smaller. And so again, and this is what I mean by the cultural preference, that is still seek a large family size. So 5.1 is an average. I mean, I think the picture that you see here is what, about 8 people in there. So I mean, it's happened in Latin America where it was not unusual. I still hear stories of I know my grandma lived, but she always tells us stories. Oh, you know, so and so had like 15 kids, you know, and oh, you know, 2 of them died. You know, it's like almost normal. Again, it was times that things were not as good in terms of medical. I mean, you live in ranches, you live out in the rural areas, but she will talk about nothing. Yeah, well, you know, she had 15 kids. You know, 2 of them died. Okay, you know, and so again, it comes a lot with sort of the rural lifestyle that still most of Africa has. So there's a lot of issues with disease in Africa. I just updated some things to bring in some of the COVID-19. I'll show you some videos of what's going on in there. Now, so we hear about malaria. They call malaria the disease of poverty. Usually malaria is brought on by mosquitoes, and usually people not having protection against this mosquito, they get bitten by it, and they get the disease. In many cases, they die from it. There are now some sort of vaccines or some prevention. It's not an actual vaccine to cure it, but it's you can prevent that from giving you a problem. We get bursts of malaria. In fact, I was reading in Latin America, in some areas in Latin America where there's outbursts of malaria have been happening. HIV, I'll get to COVID-19 in a second here, but HIV is another one. Particularly in South Africa, we had a lot of issues with HIV/AIDS. In some cases, a lot of the HIV cases were happening in this region. It is estimated that, or scientists have trying to trace where it started. It's thought that it started out in somewhere in the Congo region, and of course, that has also been brought somewhat under control. One of the things that we'll talk about in the Middle East as well, many African men go to work in the Middle East, usually in the oil field, and sometimes they go to Europe. And so many of them are out there on their own, and when men are out there by themselves, they mingle with sometimes prostitutes, sex workers, and unfortunately they do bring the diseases when they come back home. And there was a point, the professor that I knew from Long Beach State, he is an expert on HIV, on global HIV, and he was talking about how there was a point that most of the people that had HIV were actually women, and it was the result of this. Some of these men that will come back from places that were working in other parts of the world, and they would bring the diseases home when they came back to their family. So, again, these are some of these things that are sort of being controlled. There's outbursts periodically and so on. And so that brings us to COVID-19. I'm going to talk about it in the next slide in the context of other diseases like Ebola, which a whole thing that talk about that. But let me show you what is going on in Africa in terms of with COVID-19. Now, people are we haven't seen a lot of the numbers that we have seen in Europe and the United States, all of the rest of the world, but the numbers are starting to go up. I'm going to show you where we are as of yesterday, I think it was. And so, but people are very pessimistic, very afraid of what could happen with COVID-19. So let me show you what people are sort of hoping that won't happen.
Eating grilled meat in pubs is part of daily life in Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Selling it is big business. That all ground to a halt when the government ordered restaurants closed to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. All the grills on this strip have closed, all the workers laid off.
All is not well. We must adhere to the measures, but our customers are scared to come for even takeaway. We have nowhere to turn to for help.
Grilled meat traders here are among millions across Africa who've already lost their livelihoods because of restrictions on movement and trade. Shoppers in Kenya's supermarkets have to keep distance and sanitize their hands. But shops like this are the domain of the middle class, which in most African countries is tiny. Crowded markets like this are more normal. There simply isn't space for people to keep distance here. It would be impossible to enforce it. But for the people that trade in places like this and people that buy their food here, they don't come here in the daytime, they go hungry in the evening. And it's the same story for millions of people in cities across the continent. The government of the Democratic Republic of Congo has locked down the central commercial district of its capital, Kinshasa. But in most of the rest of the city, of about 12 million, people are still out and about, trying to trade.
If they don't go out to find work, they won't find means of livelihood. So that becomes a significant constraint to the containment measures the governments are instituting elsewhere. And in the absence of social protection, you're going to see upheaval.
South Africa's army has been accused of rights abuses, trying to stop any upheaval when it enforced a lockdown. The country has recorded more cases of the virus than anywhere else on the continent, possibly because it's carried out many more tests. Its lockdown seems to have succeeded in slowing the rate of infections. In much of the rest of the continent, hospitals and health ministries have recorded relatively low but sharply rising numbers so far. With many living in cramped conditions like this slum in Nairobi, health experts think the worst is yet to come.
If these interventions around testing, around isolation, around hygiene practices, around staying at home, but also taking care of the social needs of the population are not going to be thought out clearly, then we are going to see a steep rise, and which will bring in a lot of deaths.
As long as markets are busy, like this one in Nairobi, it will help the virus spread. Empty markets mean hunger and social unrest. African governments face difficult decisions in the weeks ahead. Millions of people will face the consequences. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Nairobi, Kenya.
Anyway, so like I say, a lot of it is coming, and sometimes I was reading some of the comments about this video. Keep going. And sometimes people are very critical that, yeah, well, you know, everybody expects the worst, and you know, but again, there's really tragic pictures that some videos and pictures and reports that I was reading about was found in Nigeria. It's starting to happen, and we're starting to see in Latin America. I mean, we didn't talk about it that much, but it wasn't that big at the time when we were covering that. But we're starting to see in Ecuador, where like they just, I mean, imagine if we're having issues with hospitals in New York City, here in the United States, there's just not enough beds in some of these places, and they're literally disposing of the bodies, they're putting them out on the street, so hopefully someone can come and pick them up. So we have people that have been dead for 3 or 4 days out on the street waiting for them to be picked up. Nigeria, of course, is the most populous country in Africa, and we're starting to see some of that happen. There's just not enough health workers, not enough hospitals, not enough beds to be able to put some up. Now, some of these big issues that Africa had in terms of diseases was, of course, Ebola. There were some outbreaks in 2014-15. There's literally have been, there's no official cure besides kind of like what we see with some of these diseases like COVID-19, that they spread, and then people literally just have to prevent it by, you know, disinfecting, and there's no official cure for it yet. By the way, Ebola and COVID-19 are related. Ebola is also a coronavirus. They call them coronavirus because they have their spikes, you know, around the cells of it. They're different types of COVID-19, of these sort of coronaviruses, and COVID-19 is one of them. Ebola is another one. Of course, there was a lot of issues when that happened. I think in 2015 there was some cases that came here to the United States. But you know, at that time, you know, perhaps maybe criticism of the current government, but at that time it was dealt with as swiftly, and it was prevented from being a massive outbreak. Now, Africa didn't fare the same way. They had a lot of problems, particularly in West Africa, here in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea, where they had a lot of deaths, a lot of cases of Ebola. Now, in Africa, many people are saying, well, they have experience dealing with some of these diseases, and they have been able to find, with the limited resources that they have, innovative ways to deal with it. So let me show you what in light of that, people are saying, well, Africa has some experience in it with this, perhaps they may be able to deal a little bit better with COVID-19. But here's the current situation of COVID-19 around Africa, besides just specific that I showed you earlier. But this is, I think,
African countries are taking emergency measures to stem the spread of the coronavirus as the number of identified cases grows. In West Africa, Ivory Coast said it was closing its borders for 15 days to all non-citizens traveling from countries where more than 100 cases have been recorded. The move came after Senegal, which recorded its 27th case on Monday, suspended flights from 7 European and North African countries. Ghana on Monday closed schools and banned public gatherings, as well as barring entry to non-citizens who have, within the last 14 days, been to a country that has recorded 200 or more cases. In Central Africa, Chad said it would close its airports to all countries for 2 weeks from midnight on Thursday, though it has yet to record a coronavirus case. In East Africa, where Tanzania and Somalia registered their first COVID-19 cases on Monday, Rwanda, Kenya, and Uganda have either shuttered borders, closed schools, or prohibited large public gatherings. President Cyril Ramaphosa said on Sunday that South Africa would from Wednesday close its borders to all foreigners from countries highly impacted by the pandemic. And in North Africa, while Algeria announced the suspension of all air and sea travel to and from Europe from March 19th, Egypt said it will close schools and universities for 2 weeks.
So here's one some of the numbers that is really informative site has provided. Here are some numbers as of basically today. Now they're a little bit ahead of us. This is as of 6 a.m. this morning, GMT, the so-called English time. So here see some of the cases, confirmed cases, about 15,835. Yes, I mean, New York itself has more than that already. But again, this is something that is beginning to increase in all of Africa. So again, 54 countries, and this is sort of where we are right now in Africa. But a lot of people are suspecting the worst. But again, at the same time, and so I'm trying to show you the other side as well, that people are saying, well, perhaps because it's more rural, because they have some experience dealing with this. It's a lot of time, but people say, well, how was it that South Korea, China have somewhat more effectively deal with this? I mean, they still had a lot of deaths and all that, but there's also a culture of covering your mouth. I mean, people they tend to do that a lot easier than it is for us here in the United States and in Europe. And so again, I'm not saying that that's the reason why, but people have a lot of fears about what may happen in Africa, but at the same time, perhaps maybe they can better handle it. Of course, the issues are they don't have enough technology, enough medical beds, and so on, that it could exacerbate the problem. But we hope it's not the worst. But again, they deal with these. They have dealt with they deal with diseases a lot in Africa. Now, one of the things in terms of agriculture is what is referred to as Sweden. We talk about this type of agriculture. Basically, they also call it slash and burn. And like I was talking about, sometimes transhumans move around. And so in many cases where there are forests, you actually burn the forest. And the forest actually, the ashes that created actually, it's like adding fertilizer to it. But of course, so once you burn it, you have to wait for a year, and then you can come and work on it. And then once you go into another area, into another farm, you burn it, and then you work the land again, and you may be able to come back to the other forest, but you no longer get a forest because you already burned it. And so this subsistence agriculture sometimes it can be problematic, and again, it causes some of the things that we saw in the Sahel that creates a certification and loses the productivity of the land. Pastoralism is very common in Africa, and particularly around the Sahel region, but in a lot of Africa, because it's very rural, where people, basically are tending to the animals. They have maybe a little plot where they grow some corn, some beans, some products that they can sort of feed their family. Now, there's a lot of cattle out there, including camels, particularly in the Horn of Africa, in the east part of Africa. They use it for a lot of stuff. They drink their milk, and they also use it for transportation, move things around. But they do grow them. I believe they also eat their meat in many cases. Mostly, I think no, it's mostly milk, transport, and trade. I'm not sure if they actually use it for meat. Now, another big problem with some of these heads of cattle is cessate flies. I'm gonna hope I don't gross you out, but in the next slide, I'm gonna show you some of the issues that they have with a lot of these insects and diseases. That in many of these diseases, because of the climate and so on, largely tropical, are available and they can cause a lot of problems. Sessa flies, they call it basically the sleep fly. Anyway, let me talk about it in the next slide. And they affect people. They give you basically, they put you to sleep. It may not kill you, but the same thing happened with cattle. Cattle get bitten by it. And so, and this is not from the textbook, I got it from somewhere else, but it shows you some of the issues that they have with different types of diseases, different types of pests. Malaria, of course, is transmitted by a mosquito. You can see the cases. These are 2013, 2014 sort of figures. Changes most likely have decreased in some cases, but perhaps in others have increased. So malaria, sleep sickness. Now, I can barely say schistomiasis. They also call it the river disease, because it causes blindness. No. So anyway, what happens is a lot of people still bathe on the rivers. They wash their clothes in the rivers, right? And so it's not very sanitary. Now, both of these schistomiasis and river blindness are insects, larvae that gets into your body. In the case of schistomiasis, it gets into your stomach, and it can literally bleed you, and they live inside of you. These kids are getting it. River blindness, for instance, I know you can see it's kind of gross, right? You see this picture up on the corner? These little larvae gets into your eye, and they grow in there. And of course, it leads you to eventually go blind. And they call it river blindness because people go into these rivers, they bathe and do that, and then eventually gets into their eyes. Schistomiasis is also gathered in rivers, and again, but in this case, it goes into your stomach, and it builds like a larvae inside of you, and it causes, of course, a lot of problems. We have a bug growing inside of you. Talking about Ebola briefly, that's the sleep sickness. The Sessa fly is a little tiny fly that bites you and then gives you narcolepsy, basically. You go to sleep. It happens with cattle and happens with that. So anyway, locust is one of the latest ones that's been impacting. In fact, this one comes and goes. Locust is nasty because it can literally eat an entire crop in hours, sometimes even less than an hour. And in fact, they have some outbursts. I think I put some articles in some of the latest news about the latest locust plagues I've been facing. We're going to end it pretty close here, but let me show you this quick little video that is talking about what is happening with the latest. And in fact, they already had one, and then there's another one that just came back, a whole other wave of locusts. So there's like these little bugs. I mean, let me show you the little video. And I mean, look at it. And this voracious appetite, they just eat everything in sight. And there's millions of them, you know. And people like to just watch them eat their crops. Anyway, so just as people are sort of in Africa starting to try to deal with these with this whole thing with the COVID-19, they're having to deal with some of the not normal, but some of the most common things that they usually deal with. The World Health Organization has sort of become pretty, maybe not popular, but it's one of those organizations that's come to light a lot. This is a global organization tied to the United Nations that deals with issues of global health. And those are some of the ones that gave some of the initial warnings. Unfortunately, they were sort of not followed here by, I mean, you know, I hate to, I mean, they say, oh, I don't want to get political, but I mean, Trump said he wanted to stop giving them money because he got upset because he didn't like what they were saying about the whole COVID-19. But this is an international organization funded by the UN. of course, all the members are UN funded. And so they deal with this stuff. When we have global pandemics like this, particularly with countries like in Africa and East Asia, some of the developing countries, they don't have a lot of the resources. They can provide scientists, they can provide doctors. They helped a lot with the Ebola crisis. And so these are some of the international global organizations that deal with some of these issues that are particularly global in nature, like these pandemics that are global. Anyway, I think it's a good way to stop it. Sort of move on into Africa is changing. While it's still largely rural, it's increasingly becoming more urban. But of course, these are some growing pains, like many other developing countries and the world, developing regions of the world. There's usually not enough infrastructure to deal with some of this growth in population, and particularly in the urban areas, the areas surrounding some of these sprawling cities are usually surrounded by some of these slums. And we find some in Africa that are some of the worst slums in the world. So anyway, we'll be talking about that on Thursday. Hopefully we'll get to try and finish Africa. And then we should be pretty close to that. We should finish it. Perhaps we may get started with the Middle East. Let's see. I was taking note when I was showing some of the Delia Islas here. I'll let you go in a second here. Yeah, Locust is crazy. I know Arturo, you mentioned a comment. But they're still out there, and then again, they are real. They're coming out there. And again, you have a region that is largely rural, largely dependent on agriculture. I mean, you just watch your crops be eaten by these things. I know they sound like biblical, right? But yeah, they're still out there. They're happening. So yeah, Ana Gonzalez here. Ana, if you're here, just say something in the chat, or just, I go through the list of people that are in the class. No Ana Gonzalez. And how about Delia Islas? Delia, you here? So if you're here, just say something. Okay. Got everybody who's here. Yeah. Liz Lancaster, you're here. I saw you. Rufo, Claudio Rufo, you see him? Are you here, Rufo? No. And how about Ryan Welch? Are you here? Okay. So if you're here, just say something, because otherwise. Anyway, all right, guys. So usual, stay safe and healthy. Practice social distancing. How's that going in here, by the way? You guys I know someone was saying you're already experiencing cabin fever, right? I know it's kind of hard to just get stuck. So we're watching a lot of videos on YouTube, traveling the world. I traveled so many places already. They have some really cool videos, 4K. They're just awesome. And then there's I watched some in Spanish. That this one guy. It's kind of like the what's his name? He just passed away. Cook. I'm blanking. Anthony. You know what I'm talking about?
Anthony Bourdain.
Bourdain, yeah. So they have like he's not a cook, but he's all the cook. He goes all over the world and makes it very cultural. Brings out. And I've been actually starting to watch. I kind of was sad. I didn't want to watch Bourdain. I love watching all these stories, but it kind of makes me sad. He's no longer around, especially the way he died. But anyway, well, enjoy, you guys. Try to get the most out of it. I don't know with how long we still got. I mean, I just I can probably put that map out later, but there's a map of the whole San Diego County that shows you, how many people are getting COVID-19 and how many people are dying. I was just looking at my particular zip code here in Chula Vista, and it's something like 60 people found with COVID-19. There's 2 deaths. You think like I'm looking at my zip code here, and it could be the neighbors. I don't know. So it's still crazy. Protect yourselves. Wash your hands. You go out to the store now. They're requiring you to wear masks, and I finally scored some gloves. I went to what do they call it, a Smart and Final, and they have stuff for food, to cook. And there was one left, and it was hiding. I think somebody hid it, trying to get it later on. But
Target barely
I got
stock
it.
toilet paper.
Was that? Yeah, I started to come back up. But yeah, I went to some places that they actually sell like gloves and stuff, like Harbor, freight and all that stuff. But the whole section was empty because they have a big sign said we donated all this stuff. I thought that it was kind of cool. So actually donated all that stuff to hospitals and health workers. So hang in there, you guys, and we'll be seeing you on Thursday. Take care of yourselves. Social distance. And everything's gonna be all right.
Thank
Take care,
you.
you guys. See you. So you showing me your faces. Take care. Let me stop the recording before I forget.